Hey everybody, it's F-Bomb Fitzgerald, and this game was pretty fun because on the second half, I really used a series of pins to kind of snowball my advantage and get a pretty decisive win at the end. So I started things off by playing the bishop's opening. It's one of my favorite white openings. He's just kind of mirroring me at this stage, and I was tempted to just grab the e5 pawn with my knight, because if he did the same, I have the tempo advantage and I could cause some chaos in his back line here and probably avoid any problems by castling because I did have that tempo advantage. Instead, I play conservatively and, he continues to mirror. Instead of castling, though, he plays this move, which is sort of baffling to me because it kind of messes up his king side if he wants to castle eventually on that side. And this pawn isn't really doing anything too threatening at this stage. I mean, yeah, he can park his knight here, but he could have done that anyway, because I wasn't contesting that square. So I go ahead and I pin his knight with the thought that if his plan was to put a knight here, just going to make that harder for him. Instead, he does this baffling move, which I think is just a straight up error, because his queen isn't protecting that pawn, so I can just grab that pawn for free, and I do. He brings in the bishop, kind of an empty threat, because I can just move my queen away. And at this stage, I'm up a pawn. His kingside castle is kind of a little janky, but overall I feel like our pieces are developed. I'm expecting he's probably eyeing a queenside castle. So he, does the trade back. I don't love my pawn position here. I would have preferred if we didn't have that trade. But, I am kind of in his back line with these two pieces, and I'm feeling good about that. I don't understand this move at all. Maybe it was so he could eventually bring his knight there, but given that his knight is currently pinned, this just was baffling to me. So I decide, okay, well, I'm going to try and take advantage of my queen side, really start pushing up all three of these pawns. If I can do it while kicking his bishop, so much the better. I'm developing a pretty nice pawn structure on that side. And yeah, this move to me says he's preparing to castle queen side. But honestly, if he didn't like his kingside structure because of this missing pawn, this weird structure here isn't that much better. So I continue my plan of kicking his bishop out of the way. He backs up, and then I park my queen here preemptively as a way of saying, hey, if you're going to go ahead and castle queenside, I'm going to take the free pawn. He just kind of walks right into that, though. And then he does this curious play. I didn't really understand that move either. Sure, it blocked me from putting him in check with my queen on the A8 square, but he could have done that later with no real penalties to doing so. So that just sort of felt like a wasted move. I like this attack of pushing up my A pawn with the idea of, okay, if he doesn't capture back, I'm going to capture and, put him in check here. And then this pawn is really deep in their back line. And if he does capture back, I've got, my bishop, my rook I can bring into the action. And then, it kicks this knight out of the equation. So he's going to have to get this king out of that area. He grabs. I take with the bishop. Grabs back. Half considered coming in with the rook. Maybe I should have. Either way, grabbing the tempo by putting him in check with the queen. I feel pretty good about my position. I do want to link up my rooks here, though. So I move my knight preemptively. He kicks my queen, but that's not a real threat because now this rook is defended by this one, so I can just get my queen out of there, really at no cost. Yeah, he pushes once more with a pawn, but, this is a totally fine square for me, especially because I can start bringing in this pawn and then, really contesting him here. Yeah, I don't know why he gave up contesting the A file, but, it enables me, if he's going to do that, I'm going to go ahead and set up this pin. This is a pretty nasty pin in my opinion because his king and his queen are on the same row. And, he can't immediately defend it by bringing a rook here because he doesn't have anything to defend that square. So he starts pushing this pawn. I guess he's got, a pawn, a knight, and his queen defending it. But also by pushing this pawn forward, he kind of leaves this bishop more vulnerable than it already is, and it's already in a bad position because of the pin. So I go ahead and I ignore whatever threats he's doing with this over here and just bring my bishop into here to put more pressure on this pin. He, I think, is starting to get a little bit worried about this setup of having his king and queen on the same row, but it's sort of curious to me that now he pushes his king here, and it's like, well, if I bring my if I bring my rook over to the e file, then I've got, a similar pin going this direction instead. So I don't really see that as much of an improvement for his position. Of course, now I can just straight up grab this bishop, which is free, and I think that this is the correct way of capturing. So I grabbed with the rook, so threatening his queen, and then also threatening a discovered attack on his rook. Either way, he backs up over here. This pawn is no longer defended, so I'm going to just take that free pawn. And here, this was a little bit curious. I think his idea of bringing the knight over here is to start attacking my h2 pawn. At the moment, though, this is a fairly empty threat, because if he grabs with the rook, there's not much of a follow-up. That's fine. You can go ahead and grab that one pawn. I'm already up 6 other pawns. If instead he grabs with the knight, I kind of want to reposition this rook to the e-file anyway. So yeah, if you grab it with the knight, I'll go ahead and move my rook here. It'll be safe, and it'll be in a position that I want it to be anyway, pinning this pawn. So because of that, I'm not overly concerned about this situation. I decide I'm going to trade my bishop for a rook, usually a good trade. In retrospect, I didn't realize, when he captures back with his queen, now he's threatening mate here. So there's that, but I can easily block that, and we're back to the original position of, sure, go ahead and grab this pawn with either of these pieces. I'm not overly worried. Grabs with the knight, doesn't have a great follow-up, and now I've got my rook on the e-file, and this pawn, if he pushes the pawn, I'm just going to recapture it with the rook over here, and then put him in check. This whole center position he's got is tenuous to non-existent at this stage. Instead, he plays this move, which would be a very nice fork if I didn't have that square covered by this knight already. So yeah, given that this pawn is currently pinned, that's a free knight. I just grab it. He can't recapture it because it's pinned. And at this stage, again, this is another empty threat to me where it's like, yeah, he's threatening my rook, but even if this pawn were not pinned, which it is, I could always just move my knight over to d4 to defend this rook and get it out of danger from over here anyway. Instead, I decide to bring my queen into the action. I'm defending my rook over here. And, again, this pawn still can't capture my knight. And my other thought at this stage is, okay, I've set up another nasty pin here where if he does, something with his pawns or his rook on this side, if I slide my rook over to e6 to put him in check, yeah, I'll lose the rook to his pawn, but then I just grab his queen for free. Alternately, there's a whole bunch of other situations where it's like, okay, if he does basically anything else, I'll capture his center pawn with my rook, and at that point, his only hope is to block me with his queen. Again, I'm trading a queen for a rook, which is always going to be in my favor. This is a losing position for black. Instead, he ends up playing this blunder, which is obvious checkmate. I go ahead and I just checkmate him on the back rank, but even if he hadn't done that, I honestly don't think he had any good moves. It's probably his only hope would have been to bring his queen somehow into the action over here, and like I said, at that stage, I think I probably could have just pushed either this rook to c8, and then eventually forced a rook for a queen trade that way, or brought this rook into the action here, and again, he was going to lose that queen, and then the game a move or two later regardless. Anyway, that was a fun game full of pins. Let me know in the comments section what you thought of it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.